"10 guineas," said Lord Caverly, setting down his glass so hard the stem rang against the tray, that the ticket girl at the rail cannot play anything finer than a music hall ditty. I had been secretary of Ferrers Park for 11 years by that August of 1895, and I had heard a great many careless wagers cross the floor of our clubhouse. But I had never heard one land quite so heavily, nor watched a room go quite so still around it. The reception that evening was our usual end-of-season gathering, the members in their club colors, the trophies polished within an inch of their lives, and a grand piano wheeled in from the ballroom for the string quartet that had, through some mischance of the railway timetable, failed to arrive. It sat there among the racing prints and silver cups, looking almost embarrassed by its own grandeur, waiting for someone to explain why it had been dragged into a room built for horses rather than music. The day's racing had gone well for most of the men in that room, 3 favorites home in the first 4 races, and the champagne flowing accordingly. And there is a particular carelessness that settles over gentlemen who have won money without earning it, a looseness of tongue that I had learned, in 11 years behind that desk, to watch for the way a groom watches for a change in the weather. Waiters moved among the crowd with trays of oysters and sherry. The fire was built high against the evening chill coming off the downs, and somewhere near the window, Colonel Whitfield was already recounting, for the 3rd time that I had counted, his horse's narrow victory in the 2 o'clock. It was into this warm, self-satisfied noise that Lord Caverly's voice cut, not raised particularly, but pitched with the easy carrying confidence of a man who has never once doubted that a room will listen to him. Lord Caverly was not a cruel man. I want that understood from the very start, because it matters to how the evening ended. He was bored, restless in the particular way of men who have never wanted for anything, and have therefore never learned to want anything well. He had noticed Josephine Atwood only because she happened to be crossing the members' enclosure with a ledger under her arm, delivering settlement slips for her employer, the bookmaker, Mr. Huxtable, whose stand stood just beyond the paddock rail. "That girl," he said to the room at large, nodding toward her retreating back, "sells tickets and totals odds all day. I'd wager she knows a hornpipe and nothing besides." Someone laughed, not unkindly, the way men laugh when a joke costs them nothing. Josephine stopped. I watched her shoulders set, watched her turn on the worn heel of her boot, and I confess my own stomach dropped on her behalf, for I had known the girl since she was a child, selling programs at the gate, and I did not think she had it in her to answer a lord in front of 40 members of the club. "I know more than a hornpipe, my lord," she said, and her voice did not shake, though her hands, I noticed, were very tightly folded around that ledger. "I have been taught." "Taught," Lord Caverly repeated, delighted now, the way a man is delighted when the joke offers to extend itself. "By whom, may I ask?" "The stable boys?" "By Mr. Silas Pemberton, who boards in my mother's house on Cobden Street," she said. "He played 20 years in the halls of London, before his hands grew too stiff for the encores, and he has given me a lesson every evening since I was 11 years old, whether I had a farthing to pay him or not." A ripple went through the gathered members, some amused, some already faintly ashamed on Caverly's behalf, though he had not yet noticed his own exposure. He was watching her with the lazy, pleasant interest of a man about to win something for nothing. "Then let us settle it properly," he said, and drew out his checkbook with a flourish that told me he had done this before, over horses, over hands of cards, over anything that let him feel the pleasant thrill of easy risk. 10 guineas, Miss Atwood, is it, that you cannot sit at that piano and give this room a piece of real music? Not a jig, not a song from the halls, something a concert audience would pay to hear." He glanced round for approval and received a scattering of it, the sort men give when they have already decided how an evening will end and want company in the decision. "And if I can," Josephine asked, "then I shall pay you 10 guineas, and never say another word against you so long as I live," Lord Caverly said, and he laughed as he said it, certain the question was academic. "I should tell you something of Josephine Atwood before I go further, because a wager is nothing without knowing what stood behind the girl who accepted it. She was 23 that summer, small and quick, with ink-stained fingers from the settlement books, and a plain gray dress, let down twice at the hem to see her through another season. Her father had been killed at the Newmarket Gate 5 years before, thrown from a horse he was walking, not riding. And since then, she had worked 6 days a week for Mr. Huxtable to help her mother keep the house on Cobden Street solvent. What almost no one at the racecourse knew, because she had never once mentioned it, was that in the small front parlor of that house, every evening after her ledgers were closed, she sat at an upright piano, gone slightly out of tune, and worked through scales and studies, and in later years, through pieces of a difficulty that would have astonished the very men now watching her cross the clubhouse floor. Mr. Pemberton, her teacher, had once played beside singers whose names filled the halls of Leicester Square, and when his hands had betrayed him, he had found, in young Josephine, something he called the truest ear he had encountered in 40 years at a keyboard. He asked no payment. He said, more than once, within my hearing at the gate on race days, that teaching her was payment enough, that he was merely returning to the world a portion of what music had given him. I had seen Mr. Pemberton myself on occasion, a stooped, courteous old man who walked with a cane and always tipped his hat to me at the paddock gate, and I confess I had thought of him, when I thought of him at all, as a faded curiosity, a relic of a livelier stage now dimmed. I did not know, until that evening taught me, what patience and what precision had gone on behind his quiet front parlor door. The scales repeated until the fingers bled at the tips, the same 8 bars of a study played 40 times over, while her mother called her in to supper, the long winter evenings, when coal was dear, and they worked by a single candle, because the lamp oil had to be saved for her father's old ledgers. He had taught her not merely to strike the correct notes, but to listen for the shape beneath them, to find, as he told her again and again, the sentence hidden inside the sound. She walked to the piano now with the ledger still under one arm, until Mr. Huxtable himself, red-faced and startled, hurried forward to take it from her, and I saw her hesitate only once, at the very edge of the instrument, her hand resting a moment on its closed lid, as though asking its permission. Then she sat, adjusted the stool with a small practical motion, and set her hands upon the keys. The room had not gone quiet for her. It went quiet, I think, out of simple curiosity, the way a crowd quiets before any spectacle whose outcome is not yet known, and there was, I will not pretend otherwise, a current of amusement still running under the silence, several gentlemen exchanging looks that said they expected a stumbling scale or two, and then a red-faced retreat. Lord Caverly himself had settled into a chair near the fireplace, with the particular comfort of a man who believes the evening's entertainment has already been decided in his favor. She began so softly that for a moment I thought she had lost her nerve entirely. A single high note released into the room, like a held breath finally let go, followed by another beneath it, a slow rocking figure in the left hand that seemed to sigh rather than play, and I did not know it then. But I have since learned that the piece was Liszt's Un Sospiro, which means, in the Italian, a sigh, and I have never since heard that name without thinking of the sound that filled our clubhouse that evening, half regret and half hope, folding over itself again and again, as though the music could not quite decide whether to grieve or to rejoice, and so did both together. I watched Lord Caverly's face rather than the piano, I confess, because I wanted to see the exact moment his certainty broke, and I did see it, plainly, in the space of perhaps 8 or 9 bars. His chin, which had been propped lazily on one hand, lifted. His eyes, which had been half amused, went wide and then very still. Around him the room was undergoing the same transformation in staggered waves, a conversation dying here, a raised glass lowering there untouched, until within a minute, the only sound in the whole of that trophy-hung hall was the piano itself, and, beneath it, the faint creak of the great bay window as the evening wind pressed against the glass. Her hands moved now with a fluency that seemed to owe nothing to effort, the melody rising in that long arching phrase Liszt built to climb and climb again, always just further than the ear expects, and each time it reached toward its peak, her whole small frame seemed to lift with it, not swaying for show, not performing in any theatrical sense, but simply following where the music pulled her, the way a person follows a hand held out across a river. I had heard pianists before, touring virtuosi, brought up from London for charity concerts in the town hall, men in tailcoats with reputations preceding them by weeks. And I tell you honestly that I had never in that hall, or any other, felt what I felt standing at the edge of that racecourse reception, watching a bookmaker's ticket girl in a twice let-down gray dress open a piece of music like a door onto some larger room none of us had known was there. Beneath the melody, her left hand kept a current running, an unbroken ripple of arpeggios that never once faltered, even as her right hand climbed further and further into the piano's upper register. And I remember thinking that I had never before understood how much strength could be hidden inside so gentle a sound, the way a mill race looks placid from the bank, and yet turns a great wheel beneath the surface. Twice the melody seemed to reach for a resolution, and twice it slipped past, unwilling yet to rest, climbing instead into some higher, more urgent register, and each time it did so, I saw Josephine's chin lift very slightly, the way a swimmer lifts her chin for air, before she gave herself again to the long descent. The candlelight from the sconces along the wall caught the piano's black lacquer and threw it back across the ceiling in trembling gold, and it seemed to me, fancifully perhaps, that the whole room had begun to move with her, chests rising and falling to the same slow measure. 40 grown men, breathing in time with a girl they had, 20 minutes before, been prepared to dismiss without a second thought. The crossed hands came, that famous passage where the melody must leap over itself, the right hand crossing beneath the left to catch a single golden note and carry it high above the arpeggios churning underneath. And I heard, from somewhere near the fireplace, a sound I will remember to my last day, Lord Caverly's checkbook, which he had been holding still open and ready in mockery, sliding from his fingers and striking the floor, and he did not stoop to retrieve it. He did not so much as glance down. His whole attention had gone into that room where she had taken us, and his face, in the lamplight, had lost every trace of the lazy amusement it had worn 20 minutes before. What replaced it was something closer to wonder, the particular wonder of a man discovering, in public and without warning, that he has been wrong about something in a way that costs him nothing less than his own good opinion of himself. She brought the piece home the way it must be brought home, not with a flourish, but with a long, diminishing sigh, the melody folding back down into the quiet figure it had risen from, softer, softer, until the final chord seemed to arrive from very far away and settle into the room like dust after a struck bell. And then there was nothing at all, no sound, not even the wind, for what felt to me a full 10 seconds, though I am told afterward by others who stood nearer that it could not have been more than 4 or 5. Then the room broke apart into applause of a kind I had never heard within those walls, not the polite patter that greets an after-dinner speech, but something closer to a roar, men on their feet, gloves slapping against palms, old Colonel Whitfield banging his stick upon the floorboards, and through the middle of it Josephine Atwood sat very still at the keyboard with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes bright and wet, looking, for just that moment, less like a woman who had triumphed than like a girl who could scarcely believe what her own hands had done. Lord Caverly rose from his chair before the applause had even begun to fade. He crossed the floor slowly, and I watched every member in that room watching him, waiting to see whether his pride would find some last narrow escape, some remark to shrink the moment back down to a size he could manage. He bent, retrieved his fallen checkbook from the carpet, and stood before the piano with it in his hands like a man presenting a summons to himself. "Miss Atwood," he said, and his voice had none of its earlier lazy confidence in it now. "I have made a great many wagers in my life, most of them foolish, and I have paid out on very few, with any pleasure at all. I find I am glad to pay this one." He wrote the check there against the piano's closed fallboard, the whole room watching in a silence gentler than the one that had come before, and when he tore it free and held it out to her, he did not simply hand it over and turn away, as I half expected even then. He held it a moment longer and added, 10 guineas was the wager, and 10 guineas you shall have. But I find myself wanting to offer something more, if you will permit an old fool the chance to make better use of his foolishness. Your Mr. Pemberton gave you years of evenings for no payment at all. I should like to see that generosity repaid properly. A place at the Athenaeum Academy in the city, tuition and lodging both, for as long as you care to study there. I have friends enough among its patrons to arrange it by the week's end, if you will have it." Josephine looked up at him, and I saw in her face the particular struggle of a proud girl trying to decide whether pride or gratitude should govern her tongue. And gratitude won, as I think it generally does in the honestly built heart. "I should like that very much, my lord," she said, "on the condition that Mr. Pemberton is permitted to visit and hear how I've gone on. He has waited longer for this evening than I have." "Then it is arranged," Lord Caverly said, and something in the set of his shoulders had eased, as though the wager he had truly won that evening was not the one he had proposed. Around them the members were already surging forward, old Huxtable weeping without any shame at all into a large handkerchief, younger men asking her the name of the piece so they might claim afterward to have recognized it, and somewhere in the crush I saw Mr. Pemberton himself, who I had not even known was present, standing near the door with his hat in both hands, and his face doing something between laughing and breaking, as a man's face will do when the work of half a lifetime is answered all at once. I saw Josephine Atwood again the following spring, and several springs after that, for Lord Caverly kept faithfully to his word, and more besides, calling at the academy himself, twice a term, to hear her progress reported, and standing, I am told, at the very back of the hall 3 years later, when she gave her first public recital in the city, applauding as loudly as any man there, and afterward telling anyone who would listen that he had known her talent from the very first note, a small vanity I believe he had earned the right to keep. Mr. Pemberton lived to see that recital too, seated in the front row in a coat brushed carefully for the occasion, and I am told that when she came to the list again that evening, the very piece that had begun it all, he wept without any attempt to hide it, an old man's tears falling openly onto hands that had once, 40 years before, drawn their own music from halls far grander than our little clubhouse, and had spent their last good years teaching a child by candlelight to do the same. Mr. Huxtable, for his part, never did find so quick a hand for his ledgers again, and grumbled about it pleasantly for years, though I noticed he kept, framed above his stand at the rail, the printed program from that first recital, and showed it to anyone who asked after his old ticket girl. I have been secretary of this club a long while now, and I have watched a great many wagers made and settled across its floors and drawing rooms, small triumphs and small humiliations that the members forget within the month. But I did not forget that evening, and I do not believe anyone who stood in that hall forgot it either, because it was not, in the end, a story about 10 guineas or about a lord's pride brought low. It was the sound of a door opening in a room that had never once suspected it had a door at all, and the sight of a young woman walking through it, unhurried, into a life that had been waiting quietly for her the whole time, tuned and patient as an old piano in a front parlor, for someone at last to come and play.